Have you ever stopped to think about how history really turns? Is it always the grand plans of generals and politicians? Or can it sometimes be something smaller, something you could almost touch? What if I told you that one of the most decisive factors in the Allied victory in World War II wasn't a tank, or a plane, or even a bomb, but a simple, flat-bottomed plywood boat, designed by a loud, stubborn brawler from the swamps of Louisiana? It sounds almost unbelievable, but that's exactly what we're going to get into today. So let's just start right here with this quote. I want you to really let this sink in. This isn't some reporter or some historian saying this. This is Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, the man who orchestrated the entire invasion of Europe. And this isn't something he said in the heat of the moment. This is in 1964, almost 20 years after the war, with all the benefit of hindsight. And he's not talking about Patton or Montgomery or MacArthur. He's talking about one man, a civilian, a boat builder. Just think about the weight of that statement. It's absolutely staggering. And that, right there, is the big question, isn't it? Who on earth was this guy, Andrew Jackson Higgins? And how does a man whose expertise was building boats to navigate the muddy, log-filled bayous of Louisiana end up creating the single most critical piece of hardware for the largest amphibious invasion in human history? The story's it's one of those that's stranger and, frankly, more incredible than fiction.
To really get the genius of what Higgins did, you have to understand the problem he was solving. And it was a problem that military minds considered almost unsolvable. Picture this. You have to invade Nazi-occupied Europe. The entire coastline, the fortress Europe, is bristling with machine guns, artillery, mines, and concrete bunkers. And here's the ticker. You can't use a harbor. They're all too heavily defended. You have to land hundreds of thousands of men and all their equipment, jeeps, trucks, tanks, ammunition, food, directly onto an open, hostile beach, while people are actively trying to kill you. It's a logistical nightmare of the highest order.
You know, for nearly 20 years before the war, the U.S. Navy's top engineers had been banging their heads against this wall. And what did they come up with? Honestly, it was a joke. Their designs were products of a committee totally disconnected from reality. The boats were slow, they were complicated, they couldn't handle rough surf. Worst of all, they made soldiers climb down rope ladders over the side to disembark. Can you imagine trying to do that with 60 pounds of gear on your back while machine guns are firing at you? Their designs were death traps. They were completely and utterly useless for the job that needed to be done. So, with the official military establishment totally stuck, the solution had to come from, well, somewhere completely different. Enter Andrew Higgins. He was the absolute opposite of a polished, by-the-book military contractor. He was an outsider in every sense of the word.
I mean, just look at this guy's resume. He's a lumber guy from Nebraska whose business goes belly up in the Great Depression. So what does he do? He moves to New Orleans and starts building boats. Not fancy yachts, but tough, gritty workboats for the people who actually made their living in the Louisiana swamps. Oil drillers who needed to get through shallow water. Fur trappers and, yeah, even rum runners during Prohibition who needed to outrun the Coast Guard. He learned boat design not from a textbook, but from getting his hands dirty, from seeing what worked and what broke in the real world. He was a problem solver, not a theorist.
And all that trial and error led him to create this thing, the Eureka boat. It was brilliant in its simplicity. See, most boats have a sharp bow to cut through water. His had a spoon-shaped bow, which meant it could literally just ride up and over a log or a sandbar. But the real secret sauce was the semi-tunnel he built into the hull to protect the propeller and the drive shaft. This meant he could run the boat right up onto a muddy bank and then, crucially, just throw it in reverse and pull right off again. No damage, no getting stuck. He had solved the fundamental problem of how to get a boat onto a beach and, just as importantly, get it off again. So, the Eureka boat was a fantastic piece of engineering. It was tough, it was reliable, it could go where other boats couldn't. But it was still missing one key ingredient, one final piece of the puzzle that would elevate it from a great workboat to a war-winning weapon. You really get a sense of Higgins' personality from this. When the Navy finally came to him and showed him their own official blueprints for a landing craft, he didn't write a polite memo. He took a pencil and just scrawled right across their work, "This boat stinks, AJ." That was him. Brash, arrogant, totally confident in his own practical knowledge, and he was about to prove them all wrong. And this right here is the moment everything changes. It's an incredible story. A young, forward-thinking Marine lieutenant, a guy named Victor Krulek, comes to Higgins. He's frustrated too. He shows Higgins a photograph he took of a landing craft the Japanese were using in China, and it had a ramp on the front. Higgins, this boat-building genius, looks at this picture for no more than 30 seconds. And in that half minute, It all clicked. He instantly saw how to combine the ramp idea with his own superior Eureka haul. And get this, he didn't wait for a contract. On his own dime, using his own money, he built a working prototype in less than a month. It was the perfect marriage of ideas.
And this was the result. The landing craft, vehicle, personnel, the LCVP. But everybody just called it the Higgins Boat. It was nothing fancy. It was basically a 36-foot plywood box with a diesel engine and a steel ramp. But it was perfect. It could carry 36 fully armed soldiers or a jeep and a dozen men, run them right onto the sand, drop the ramp, unload them in seconds, and then back out to go get more. Simple, cheap to build, and it worked. It worked beautifully.
So, okay, Higgins has designed the perfect boat. He solved the engineering problem. But now he faces a second, arguably even bigger challenge. He has to figure out how to build not one, not 100, but thousands of these things. And the clock was ticking. To give you a sense of the mountain he had to climb, just before Pearl Harbor, his company, Higgins Industries, was a pretty small outfit. We're talking fewer than 75 people on the payroll. A boutique boat building shop, basically.
Now look at this. Just 2 years later, he was employing more than 20,000 people. 20,000! That's not just growth. That's an explosion. He basically willed one of the largest manufacturing plants of the war into existence out of thin air, driven by pure necessity and his own ferocious energy.
And the way he did it was just as revolutionary as the boat. He needed workers, and he didn't care who they were as long as they could do the job. So he hired women, the elderly, people with disabilities. And in the deeply, deeply segregated city of New Orleans in the 1940s, he did something unthinkable. He created a fully integrated workforce. He hired black workers and paid them the exact same wage as white workers for doing the same job. This wasn't because he was some progressive crusader. It was because he was a pragmatist. He needed boats built to save American lives, and he wasn't going to let prejudice get in the way of production. He broke social barriers because he had a war to win.
So you have the revolutionary design, you have the unprecedented production, and it all comes down to this. One single day, June 6, 1944, D-Day, the ultimate test for everything Andrew Higgins had built. The story of that morning is really a tale of two beaches. At a place called Utah Beach, the landings went surprisingly well. The Higgins boats hit the sand, the ramps went down, and thousands of men and vehicles got ashore. But then there was Omaha Beach. Omaha was a catastrophe. It was hell on earth. The boats came in under a storm of machine gun and artillery fire. The thin plywood sides offered zero protection. Men were slaughtered as the ramps dropped. But here's the incredible thing. Despite the carnage, the boats kept coming. The coxswains, the young men driving them, who survived would turn their boat around, go back for another load of soldiers, and drive right back into that meat grinder over and over again. They were the lifeline. In the chaos, they were the one thing that kept working. And when you looked at the numbers, you see the impact. On that one day, 156,000 Allied troops came ashore from the sea. An amphibious assault on a scale the world had never seen and has never seen since. And it was only possible because thousands of these little Higgins boats acted as a constant conveyor belt, delivering the men and material that would ultimately liberate a continent. So after all that, what do we make of this story? What's the real legacy of Andrew Higgins and this funny-looking boat that he built?
We come full circle, back to Eisenhower's words. But now they hit differently, don't they? Now you understand exactly what he meant. This wasn't just a helpful piece of equipment, it was the linchpin. Without the Higgins boat, there is no D-Day. There's no island hopping in the Pacific against the Japanese. The Allies would have had to come up with a completely different and likely far bloodier strategy for winning the war. It's not hyperbole to say this one invention fundamentally shaped the world we live in today.
But there's a final, tragic twist to this story. The moment Japan surrendered, the government contracts that it fueled this massive industrial empire, they just stopped. They were canceled overnight. And Higgins, the man who was a genius at meeting the demands of war, he just couldn't pivot to a peacetime economy. He fought with the labor unions he'd once empowered, he sold off his assets, and he died only 7 years after the war, in 1952, with most of his vast fortune gone. He won the war, but couldn't win the peace. It's an incredible irony.
And that really leaves us with one last question to chew on. The best and brightest minds in the U.S. Navy couldn't solve this problem for 2 decades, but a loud, stubborn, self-taught boat builder from the swamp solved it in a matter of months. It just makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the impossible problems we're facing right now? And where is the next Andrew Higgins going to come from? It probably won't be from where we expect. It'll be an outsider, someone with hands-on knowledge, someone who isn't afraid to look at the official blueprints and say, "This stinks."